In sociology, there is the concept of male bonding. I shall be discussing male bonding in Memoriam A.H.H in some detail at a later point. Right now, I would like to point out that social science defines male bonding as the formation of close personal relationships, the formation of patterns of close friendship between males. I would like to observe that one can identify numerous instances of male bonding in the work in hand. Even that male bonding is an important thematic strand of the work under consideration. Again and again, the poet reveals how close his relationship with Helen was, how they interacted frequently with each other, how they shared common interests, and how they took part in joint activities. Canto 21, which can be called the Linnet Canto, is one of the most beautiful cantos in this beautiful work. I have always enjoyed teaching it. By the time Canto 21 opens, Hallam has been buried. Grasses are around the grave of Hallam. Reeds are around the grave of Hallam. The poet continues to lament the death of his friend. Travelers passing by respond in differing ways to what the poet does. But all the responses are, in some way or the other, extremely negative. The travelers are unable to understand and appreciate what the poet does. By lamenting the death of Hallam, the poet only makes weakness weak. That is what they feel. The poet parades his pain. Again, that is what they feel. When the world is grappling with larger issues, larger issues of a political nature, of a social nature, here is a man lamenting the death of his friend, which is a very private, very personal grief without universal ramifications. At a time when science is expanding its horizons, when science is uncovering truth after truth, here is a man endlessly lamenting the death of his friend. Is it appropriate? Such are the responses of the travelers, all of which are negative. The poet has a reply to all these responses. The poet sees himself as a linnet. The linnet is a very common farm bird, is a very common songbird. It's a farm bird, it's also a songbird of the finch family. The linnet is widespread in the United Kingdom, and I think it's found everywhere in the United Kingdom except perhaps in northern Scotland. The poet is a linnet. The linnet cannot but sing. Sometimes the linnet sings a happy song, as when she sees her little ones. At other times, the linnet sings a sad song, as when her brood is stolen away. The poet's explanation is that he can't help it. Whatever other people may say, he cannot but sing, and he cannot but sing of the death of Hallam. The linnet is a small brown bird of the finch family. As I said, it's widespread in England, in the United Kingdom. It is one of the favorite birds of English poets. I'm sure that the linnet is found in Shakespeare, though offhand I am unable to give chapter and verse. There is the poem titled The Green Linnet by William Wordsworth, and in the poem The Lake Isle of Innisfree, the Lake Isle of Innisfree, W.B.H. speaks of an evening full of linnets' wings. These are just random examples. Canto 22 throws light on how the friendship between speaker and subject evolved. Both Tennyson and Hallam went to Cambridge. They spent half a decade there. They loved going for long walks through the countryside. Their friendship grew from strength to strength. Their friendship became stronger with each season, with each year, until the fifth year was reached. In the fifth year, a shadow began to fall on Hallam. This could be a reference to the agues that Hallam started suffering while still at Cambridge. Ague is the old word for fever accompanied by shivering. The friendship between Tennyson and Hallam was broken by death. Hallam passed away on September the 15th, 1833. The death occurred in Vienna. Hallam was only 22 years old, and it appears that he had suffered a massive stroke. The poet tried to follow his friend, but he failed, and death, who carried away Hallam, is now waiting for the arrival of Tennyson. Canto 23 brilliantly captures the golden days of friendship between Tennyson and Hallam before death struck Hallam. And death is presented as the shadow cloaked from head to foot, and the holder of the keys to all creeds. Death is presented as a mysterious figure in black, and as the holder of the keys to all creeds and religions. Death alone has a final understanding of the ultimate reality. In those happy days, as Tennyson and Hallam wandered through the countryside, it appeared to them that all nature was charged with divine life. They almost came across nymphs, gods, and goddesses wherever they went. It was almost as if classical mythology came alive around them. They interacted, Tennyson and Hallam interacted frequently with each other and guided each other. And time brought nothing to them except what was good and what was fair and what was beautiful. And the two intellectual comrades scaled the heights of Greek philosophy. In fact, they lived a very happy, fulfilling life in what appeared to them to be Arcadia. The poet now wonders whether the past was actually as happy, as glorious as he says it was. The poet tries to correct himself. The past was never really so happy and so glorious. This is the case with everything. Take, for example, the case of the sun itself. The sun, which is the source of day, which is the cause of day, is accompanied in its rotations by spots of night and darkness. How come that the past appears to be so happy and glorious to the poet now? Maybe the unhappiness of the present, the grief of the present, makes the past look so happy and glorious, magnifies the happiness, magnifies the glory of the past. In the last stanza of Canto 24, the poet tries to work out the universalization. He says perhaps the past will always remain beautiful and glorious because it is removed from us in time, because it is removed from us from space. And this removal in time and in space lends enchantment to it. He exemplifies this generalization, this universalization with a concrete example. The earth, for instance, which appears so rough and imperfect to us living on it, would appear to be a perfect star, a brilliant star, a glorious globe of light when observed from a distance. Canto 25 contains the beautiful image of the carrier pigeon which flies through the air happily, unmindful of the burden of the message tied to its foot. The message being, of course, a message of love. Similarly, the comradeship that the poet enjoyed with Hallam helped him fly through life unmindful of its burden. The poet explains that by sharing the burden of life in half with his friend, he lightened it and was able to travel through life without feeling its weight. In Canto 26, the poet declares that he has decided to continue the journey of his existence despite the gloom of his life, the burden of his life. Nobody can foresee what is going to happen in the future except, of course, the Almighty. God can see in the glory of a tree its decay, and God can see in the height of a tower its fall soon after it is built. If God can foresee the erosion of love with the passage of time, the conversion of love into indifference with the passage of time, the poet does not want to live anymore. He wants to put an end to his existence and meet the shadow of his friend waiting with the keys to the other world, so that he, the poet, will be protected against the contemptuous experience of converting love into indifference. The experience of converting love into indifference, which deserves nothing but scorn. It is clear by now that the poet is a man of moods. His moods change dramatically. But in Canto 27, he declares that in any of his moods, he does not envy the linnet born in the cage. The linnet, I've already said, is a small brown songbird, small brown farm bird, widespread in the United Kingdom, except perhaps in northern Scotland. The linnet makes its second appearance in Memoriam A.H.H in this canto. This can be called the second linnet canto. The poet says that the linnet born within the cage, the linnet that lives within the cage, does not know the freedom of the woods. The poet does not envy such a linnet. Similarly, the poet does not envy the man who is a beast, the man without any moral sense, the man without any moral scruples, the man without any ethical conscience. To use the poet's words, the man unfettered by the sense of crime. He has no sense of right and wrong, and perhaps he lives a much more happy life than the poet, because he does not commit sin. He does not know what is sin. He is not aware of the concept of sin. The poet does not envy such a man. Similarly, the poet does not envy the heart which has not loved. To love is to make oneself vulnerable. Perhaps the heart that does not love keeps itself safe, secure, protected, but the poet does not. envy such a heart. And the last stanza contains some of the most famous lines written by Lord Tennyson. I shall read the entire stanza. I hold it true, whatever befall, I feel it when I sorrow most. 'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. The last two lines of the canto, the last two lines of the stanza, very famous. In fact, I heard these lines for the first time when I was a child from my father. 'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. In Canto 28, we find Christmas approaching. Christmas is a Christian festival which celebrates the birth of Jesus, the Son of God and God the Son. It is celebrated on December the 25th by many churches, but also on other dates by the Armenian Church, for example, the Orthodox Church, for example. There is absolutely no evidence in the New Testament to indicate that Jesus was born on December the 25th. And during the first 2 or 3 centuries of Christianity, there was no celebration of the birth of Jesus on December the 25th. It is said that early Christianity appropriated the Roman holiday on December the 25th, which celebrated the rebirth of the Son, and converted it into the celebration of the birth of Jesus. Be that as it may, Christmas is the festival which spreads peace and goodwill to the entire humanity, to all mankind. But as far as the poet is concerned, there is not much peace and goodwill. He finds himself sorrowing deeply. He sleeps and wakes up with pain, wishing that his life would come to an end. However, the magic of Christmas works its wonders on the sorrowing poet, and the Christmas bells bring the poet sorrow touched with joy. The merry, merry bells of Yule bring the poet sorrow touched with joy. This canto highlights the role of religion in Victorian England. We shall be discussing it in some detail later. The role of Christianity in Victorian England, the role of Christmas in Victorian England. Incidentally, the tradition of erecting Christmas trees was almost unheard of in England until Queen Victoria, until the times of Queen Victoria. For Victoria married a German prince, Prince Albert, who brought over to England a Christmas tree from his native land. It was quite popular in Germany, the tradition of erecting Christmas trees. And this Christmas tree was erected in the grounds of Windsor Castle, in Windsor Castle. And the family of the Queen Victoria, her husband, and their children were photographed in front of the tree. And this ignited the fashion of erecting Christmas trees in England. And from England, this fashion came to India. The poet finds something seriously objectionable to the celebration of Christmas, to the arrangements of Christmas Eve. In stanza 29, in the backdrop of the death of Hallam, the poet asks, how dare they celebrate Christmas Eve? How dare they celebrate Christmas when the sorrow of the death of Hallam, the grief of the death of Hallam hangs over us? But then he tries to explain what he sees. This is the tradition. This is the custom. And the members of the household who celebrate Christmas, who arrange Christmas Eve, should have their due. Why should they miss their yearly due before their time? They too will die. After all is said and done, death is universal. Death is the final fate that awaits everyone. So, why should the women who enjoy Christmas so much deny themselves the celebration of Christmas just because Hallam died? They too will die. So they decide to celebrate Christmas in Canto 30. And so they celebrate Christmas despite the fact that the death of Hallam has brought fresh sorrow, fresh grief, and the death of Hallam is very much in the backdrop. They go through the motions of the celebration of Christmas rather mechanically. They play the old games that are part of the season, but the fact is that they cannot forget the death of Hallam. They pause, they sit in silence, they look at each other, then they begin to sing. The poet makes it clear that there is something hollow about the celebration, about the joy, about the happiness of that particular Christmas. Meanwhile, the soul of Hallam, freed from its bodily constraints, rises to begin its new existence. The poet prays to God to bless it. May Christmas be the opportunity for the soul of Hallam to receive the blessings of God. One of the reasons why In Memoriam A.H.H was such a popular book in its own day, such a popular work in its own day, is that it succeeded in very closely reflecting the location in which it is cited, in very closely reflecting the England of the day. For starters, we have brilliant pictures of the scenic beauty of England. Lovers of England, Anglophiles, would say that if there is a heaven on earth, it is England. I've heard Indians say it, Indian Anglophiles say it. In the work in hand, we get remarkable pictures of the scenic beauty of England, its rivers, its moors, its woods, its birds, including, of course, the linnet. We also get graphic pictures of the world of Victorian England with its emphasis on religion. We come to know the key role played by Christianity in Victorian life. We realize that science was ever expanding its horizons rapidly, dramatically, spectacularly in the Victorian world. We understand that Victorian society was a rather sexist society. A sexist society, I should not have said a rather sexist society, a sexist society in which men were privileged over women. Men were much more equal than women. We also understand that from the poem, we also understand that Victorian society had rigidly defined classes, not merely in social terms, not merely in financial terms or economic terms, but also in cultural terms. Some light is thrown, for example, by Canto 21 on the division in Victorian society between the Philistines, as Matthew Arnold calls them, and the intellectuals. The poet sings his song. The travelers object to the song, are unable to appreciate the value of the song. It can be interpreted on a literal plane, of course, but it can also be interpreted in a wider sense, in a more generalized manner, to highlight the division in Victorian society between the Philistines and the intellectuals. The poet obviously sees himself as an intellectual, rich in cultural capital. But many around him are unable to understand his contribution, and they are the Philistines.